Lena doesn't think about trade policy when she shops. She thinks about color, size, and whether the dress will arrive before Saturday. It's late evening in a small apartment, rain tapping the window softly, and her phone glows in her hand like a tiny storefront that never sleeps. She scrolls past a sweater for the price of a sandwich, a phone case cheaper than a bus ticket, a kitchen gadget that costs less than a coffee. The prices feel almost playful, like the internet is winking at her. Go on. It's only a few euros. She taps buy, and the purchase disappears into the invisible world behind the screen. A few days later, a small parcel appears at her door light as a loaf of bread, sealed in plastic, traveling thousands of kilometers like it took a shortcut through reality. Lena is happy. The story ends there for most of us. But in the background, another story has been building quietly, parcel by parcel, day after day, until it became too large to ignore. In Europe, policymakers have been moving toward a simple idea. If billions of low-value parcels keep pouring in, the system that processes them can't keep treating them like harmless little exceptions. So a proposal appears that sounds almost tiny compared to the scale of the economy, a small fee around a few euros, applied to certain low-cost parcels coming into the European Union starting in the near future. People read that and shrug. A few euros. What's the big deal? But a few euros is exactly how this story works. The entire era of ultra-cheap parcels is built on a few euros, repeated millions and millions of times, until it changes how shopping works, how competition works, and how the rules of fairness feel for everyone else. To understand why a small parcel can become a big political issue, imagine a school with two doors. The front door is where everyone is supposed to enter. Teachers stand there, attendance is taken. Bags are checked if needed. Everyone follows the same rules. Now imagine there's a side door around the corner. It's small. It was meant for special cases, a parent dropping off a forgotten lunch, a delivery of pencils, a student arriving late with a note. At first, the side door is helpful. It makes life easier. But one day, students discover that the side door is faster, and no one checks it as carefully. Soon, more and more people start using it. Not because they're criminals, not because they're evil, simply because it's easier. And then the side door becomes crowded, the hallway behind it becomes chaotic. The front door feels pointless. The people who followed the rules at the front start asking, why am I waiting in line when everyone else slips in through the side? The school doesn't have a moral crisis first. It has a logistical crisis. Then it has a fairness crisis. That is what's happening with parcels. For years, many countries used special thresholds for very low-value imports. The reasoning was simple and practical. If a package is worth only a few euros, it might cost more to process the paperwork than the tax you collect. So the system created a shortcut. A side door. Low-value items often moved with simplified procedures, fewer checks, and a kind of gentle assumption. This is small. It's not worth slowing down the whole building. That worked when the flow was truly small, when low-value parcels were occasional, not a daily flood. But online shopping changed the scale. A marketplace can now sell directly to millions of people, shipping individual items one by one, instead of sending large containers to local warehouses. Instead of one big truck arriving at the front door, you get 1,000 scooters slipping through the side door, each claiming to be tiny. Now picture a river of parcels. Not a metaphorical river, an actual physical stream of small packages moving through airports, sorting centers, vans, and mailboxes. Each parcel may be light, but together they weigh on the system. Each parcel may be cheap, but together they create an entire economy of almost free convenience. And when the river becomes a flood, the people standing on the banks start noticing what the water is washing away. Tax revenue, safety oversight, and the ability for local businesses to compete on equal terms. If Lena's parcel is one leaf floating down that river, then Marco is one of the people working under the bridge. Marco is a courier driver in a European city. He starts his day before the sun fully rises. He scans, loads, sorts, scans again. He's not thinking about geopolitics. He's thinking about time, how many stops, which streets are under construction, how many signatures needed, how many parcels fit into a van before the doors refuse to close. Over the years, he's watched the shape of deliveries change. More small packages. More one item, one parcel. More addresses. More returns. It's not just that people buy more. It's how they buy. Smaller, more frequent, more impulsive. The system becomes a machine designed for speed, but speed has a hidden cost. Someone has to pay for the machinery. This is where the proposed fee begins to make sense, even to someone who doesn't care about politics. A parcel entering a region isn't just an object, it's a task list. It must be transported, scanned, tracked, sometimes checked, sometimes labeled, sometimes stored briefly, sometimes redirected, sometimes returned. Customs systems have to process data. Postal systems have to carry the last mile. Regulators worry about product standards, counterfeit goods, unsafe materials, and whether the declared value is real. Every one of these steps costs money and time. When parcels were fewer, those costs were manageable. When parcels become billions, the cost becomes a budget line big enough to argue about. So when you hear a small fee, don't imagine it as a punishment. Imagine it as a way of paying for the crowded hallway behind the side door. A way of saying, if you use this entry, you help fund the staff and the tools that keep the building running. The most important thing to understand is that Europe, only about shoppers like Lena. It's also about the invisible workers and systems that make Lena's experience feel effortless. But logistics alone doesn't explain the emotional heat around this. The deeper reason is fairness. Meet Sophie, who runs a small clothing shop in a mid-sized European town. Sophie isn't trying to become a billionaire. She's trying to pay rent, pay staff, keep a small corner of the street alive. She orders inventory, follows labeling rules, pays taxes, handles consumer protection, deals with returns and complaints. When a customer walks in and tries on a jacket, Sophie smiles, offers help, and hopes the customer buys it. But sometimes the customer says something Sophie hears more and more often. I saw something similar online for 1/3 of the price. Sophie doesn't argue. She knows the internet exists. She knows consumers need affordability. But she also knows something else. The online price often looks low because parts of the cost are simply missing from the sticker. The price doesn't always include the same taxes, the same compliance costs, the same safety standards, or the same environmental costs. It's not that one side is morally good and the other is morally bad. It's that one side is playing on a different field. Here is a simple way to see it. Imagine two students selling lemonade at a school fair. Student A sells lemonade at a table in the approved area, where the school collects a small fee for cleaning, where the student must follow rules about ingredients, and where the student can't block the hallway. Student B sells lemonade from a backpack through the side corridor, avoiding the table fee, avoiding the cleanup fee, and skipping the ingredient rule because no one is watching. Student B can sell cheaper, not because Student B is a better entrepreneur, but because Student B is using the side door. Over time, Student A stops selling lemonade, not because lemonade is unpopular, but because the rules of the fair no longer feel consistent. Eventually, the school has to decide, do we close the side corridor, or do we charge something to make it fair, or do we accept that the fair will become something else entirely? That is the question Europe is facing with ultra-cheap parcels. If the side door remains wide open, local businesses like Sophie's feel the ground shifting under their feet. If the side door closes too quickly, consumers like Lena feel punished for simply choosing what they can afford. So policymakers try to find a middle path. Keep commerce flowing, but make it less free to bypass the system. There's another layer, quieter but serious: safety and trust. When goods arrive in huge volumes, oversight becomes difficult. It's not that every cheap item is unsafe. Many are fine. But the math changes when the volume explodes. Imagine a teacher checking homework. If there are 20 students, the teacher can read every page carefully. If there are 2,000 students, the teacher must use shortcuts, spot checks, patterns, automated tools. When the number grows beyond what oversight can reasonably cover, the chance that unsafe or non-compliant items slip through rises. Again, not because most people are doing something wrong, because scale changes everything. A small fee can be a way of funding the teacher's tools: better data systems, better inspection capacity, better enforcement, better ability to protect consumers without bringing trade to a standstill. Now, if you're watching this as a viewer, you might ask a very reasonable question. Okay, but is this really about protecting me, or is this about raising money? The honest answer is, it can be both. Governments do care about revenue because revenue pays for public services. They also care about fairness because unfair systems eventually create political backlash. And they care about safety because one scandal can break trust in an entire market. In real life, policy choices often have multiple motivations. The key is not to pick a single villain. The key is to understand the incentives. Let's return to Lena for a moment. Lena doesn't feel like she's cheating, she feels like she's surviving modern life. When rent and groceries rise, small savings become large emotional relief. A €10 difference can be dinner. A €20 difference can be a week of transit. When critics say, people should just buy local, it can sound like moral advice from someone who doesn't check their bank balance. That's why this story is delicate. The ultra-cheap parcel economy grew because it solved a real need: affordability and convenience. It also grew because the internet made direct-to-consumer global shipping easy to scale. But the same forces that made it beautiful for shoppers made it brutal for systems built in an older era: customs, postal networks, local retailers, regulators. A system designed for occasional small parcels is now asked to process a non-stop flow like it is normal. So what happens when Europe adds a small fee or tightens the rules? Here is the gentle twist. The first thing that changes may not be the price of Lena's dress. The first thing that changes may be the shape of the business behind the dress. Platforms and sellers adapt fast. If the side door becomes more expensive, companies will look for another route. They might ship more goods in bulk to European warehouses, then distribute locally, so that the border crossing happens once for a large shipment instead of billions of times for individual items. They might bundle multiple items into one parcel. They might push more products through local fulfillment centers. They might raise minimum order sizes. Free shipping if you spend more than. They might adjust return policies. They might slow down delivery promises. They might change the way taxes are displayed at checkout so fewer surprises happen at the door. In other words, the market will not simply stop, it will evolve. And when the market evolves, consumers notice the changes in simple, everyday ways. Lena might see slightly higher prices on very cheap items, the kind where a €3 fee is a big percentage of the total. She might see fewer €1 miracles. She might see a shift towards spend a little more, get a little more reliable. She might notice that delivery becomes a bit more predictable, because more goods are stored closer. Or she might notice the opposite for certain categories. If compliance tightens, some sellers may exit, reducing variety. The shopping experience changes not like an explosion but like a tide shifting slowly. Now let's look at the same changes through Marco's eyes. If more goods are processed through local warehouses instead of arriving as endless individual parcels, the delivery network could become more efficient. Fewer tiny packets from far away might mean fewer awkward routes, fewer returns across continents, fewer headaches at sorting centers. But it could also mean new pressures. Warehouses expand, logistics firms invest, local delivery competition changes. The point is not that one policy makes everything better. The point is that the system begins to rebalance. The side door becomes less of a free-for-all, and the front door regains some purpose. And through Sophie's eyes, a small fee can feel like a small breath. Not a guarantee of survival, but a signal that the playing field may become slightly more even. If ultra-cheap parcels rise in cost by a few euros, Sophie's products don't suddenly become cheap, but the psychological gap narrows. The customer might still buy online sometimes because convenience is real, but they might also stop treating local shops as showrooms for products purchased elsewhere. That matters for the life of streets, the employment of small teams, and the character of neighborhoods. Again, not a moral argument, an ecosystem argument. Retail isn't only a transaction. It's part of how cities feel alive. If we zoom out even further, there is a bigger theme hiding inside the parcel debate. The world is slowly moving from purely cheap globalization to managed globalization. For years, the dominant philosophy was simple: if it's cheaper, it's better. Efficiency was king. But recent years have reminded governments that efficiency can become fragile. Systems can be overwhelmed, supply chains can break, trust can be exploited, and domestic industries can feel hollowed out. So governments start to care more about resilience and fairness, even if it means a little more cost. A small parcel fee is one tiny expression of that larger shift. Not the whole story, just a symptom of a world that is reconsidering how open the side door should be. Now here's the part that often gets missed. This debate is also about information. The modern parcel economy runs on data-declared values, product descriptions, seller identities, shipping routes. If the data is incomplete or messy, enforcement becomes impossible. If the data is clean and standardized, enforcement becomes easier without slowing trade too much. That's why policies often talk not only about fees but also about reporting requirements. platform responsibilities, and the ability for authorities to trace what's coming in. Think of it like a library. A library can lend books smoothly when every book has a barcode and every loan is recorded. If books are flowing in and out without barcodes, the library can still function for a while until it can't. The fee, the rules, and the data standards are all ways of putting barcodes on a system that has grown too large to manage casually. You might be wondering, if this change happens, who really pays? The simplest answer is, the cost will be shared, but not evenly. On the surface, the shopper may pay a fee or see higher prices. But sellers may absorb some of it to stay competitive. Platforms may redesign shipping to reduce per parcel costs. Logistics companies may gain business if warehousing grows. Local retailers may benefit slightly if the price gap narrows. Governments may gain some revenue or reduce the burden on public postal systems. Consumers may gain some safety and fewer surprises. Like most economic changes, there isn't one winner and one loser. There is a rearrangement of costs that were previously hidden. And that brings us to the emotional heart of the story. The illusion of free, ultra-cheap parcels feel like a gift. But every gift has someone paying somewhere. If a product costs less than the delivery, you should ask quietly and without judgment, where did the cost go? Sometimes the answer is scale and efficiency. Sometimes the answer is lower labor costs in production. Sometimes the answer is a platform subsidizing shipping to win market share. Sometimes the answer is a tax loophole. Sometimes the answer is lighter oversight. Sometimes the answer is environmental costs not included in the sticker. Most of the time, it's a mix. This is not meant to shame anyone for buying affordable goods. It's meant to restore a simple truth. The price tag is not the whole price. The fee debate is Europe saying, gently, we need the sticker to include a bit more of reality. If you want to predict what you'll notice as these rules tighten, you don't need to read legal documents. You can watch for a few practical shifts in your own shopping experience. You may see checkout screens changing, more clarity on taxes and fees, fewer surprise charges at delivery. You may see platforms encouraging bundles. Buy more items together. You may see fewer ultra-cheap single items because a flat fee hits the smallest purchases hardest. You may see more local fulfillment. Ships from within the EU, which often means goods were imported in bulk and stored locally. You may see delivery promises becoming more realistic, less too good to be true. You may see return policies tighten for low-value goods, because returns across borders are expensive. And you may see a gradual shift in how consumers decide. Fewer impulse buys of tiny items. More considered purchases not because people became morally superior, but because the math changed. There's a quiet irony in all of this. The fee is small enough that some people won't care. But it's precisely because it's small that it can reshape behavior. Tiny frictions influence millions of decisions. A €3 change can turn sure, why not into maybe later. It can turn 10 micro-purchases into one planned purchase. It can push businesses to move inventory closer to customers. It can push the system away from flooding itself. In a world where most big problems come from countless small actions happening at scale, small frictions can be powerful. And where does that leave Lena standing in her apartment, scrolling again on a rainy night? She will still shop. She will still want affordable options. But she may begin to notice a different feeling. Fewer miracles, more structure. Fewer, how is this even possible, prices. More, this seems reasonable, and that change, if it happens, will feel like the market growing up a little. Not becoming less global, but becoming more managed. Not ending convenience, but paying for it more honestly. If you wanted to explain this entire story to a child, you could do it with the school doors. You would say, the side door was meant for a few people, but now everyone uses it. The hallway is crowded. The school can either close the side door, or it can add a small rule so the side door doesn't break the whole building. The rule isn't about punishing kids. It's about keeping the school working and making it feel fair for everyone. In the same way, Europe's parcel crackdown isn't simply about stopping cheap shopping. It's about making a gigantic system built from billions of small choices work without collapsing under its own convenience. So the next time a parcel arrives at your door light, as air, remember that it traveled through a world of pipes. Custom systems, sorting centers, advanced data networks, and rules that decide what gets checked and what passes quickly. The era of ultra-cheap parcels made that world feel invisible. The new era is making it visible again, not with a dramatic bang, but with a small fee and a clear message. The side door is still open, but it can't be free forever. And if you'd like, The next episode can follow the hidden engine behind this. The business model of one item, one parcel, why it exploded so quickly, and what happens when platforms shift from flooding the side door to building warehouses near the front. Because the most interesting part of economic change is rarely the policy announcement. It's watching how real people shoppers, couriers, small shops, and giant platforms quietly adapt when the rules of the hallway change.